And even the NBA was kind of second fiddle to it in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So it was a real heavy expectation. It was an honor to be there, but then it was a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure I put on myself, am I good enough? A lot of pressure. Words cannot express how grateful and excited I am. So I prepared remarks and simply want to thank some people.
At 72 years old, Jamaal Wilkes finally opened up about 5 NBA legends he will never forgive. And these aren't just casual beefs or petty disagreements between old athletes. These are the men who fundamentally altered the trajectory of his life, his legacy, and his entire place in basketball history forever. Silk, as he was known throughout his playing career, was a 4-time NBA champion, a 2-time NCAA champion, and a Hall of Famer whose resume rivals the greatest icons of all time. Yet he remains somehow a footnote while others tower in the spotlight like giants. The reason? 5 men, 5 unforgivable debts. 5 reasons why, even at 72, looking back at a legendary career of sustained excellence and championship success, there are chapters he still can't close. These aren't regrets exactly. These are the scars that shaped him into who he became. The first of these legends is Bob Love, and to understand why Wilkes can never forgive him, you have to first understand what Love represented in that era. In 1974, when the Golden State Warriors drafted Wilkes with the 11th overall pick, the NBA was a completely different animal than what we know today. This wasn't the finesse league it would become. This was the drug-fueled, enforcer-heavy 1970s where physical dominance ruled everything and defined entire careers. Scouts looked at Wilkes and saw something that genuinely frightened them. Here was a 6'6" guy weighing less than 200 pounds, with a UCLA pedigree and a weird, absolutely beautiful jump shot. Too thin, too soft, too much college, not enough street toughness. Bob Love made it his personal mission to prove that those doubts were absolutely right. Love was everything Wilkes wasn't. A stutterer who had clawed his way up from Southern University, Love played with a chip on his shoulder the size of Chicago itself. He was a physical, aggressive scorer who used his body as a weapon and didn't apologize for it. In the 1974-75 season, he averaged 22 points and over 6 rebounds a game, leading the Bulls with an attitude that said, "I belong here and you don't." Period. No debate. The crucible came in the 1975 Western Conference Finals. 7 brutal games. The Warriors and Bulls were evenly matched, but the individual battle at forward between Wilkes and Love was the pivot point of absolutely everything that would follow. For an entire series, Love tested Wilkes' durability and pain tolerance on every single possession. He posted him up, drove his shoulder directly into Wilkes' chest, challenged the rookie to hold his ground, and prove he belonged. Love didn't see a future Hall of Famer. He saw a kid who needed to be broken down and rebuilt from scratch. Game 6 came with the Bulls facing elimination. Love exploded, schooling the Warriors' defense with 20 points and physical dominance. But then came Game 7, the deciding matchup. In an 83-79 defensive slugfest, the Warriors won. While Rick Barry got the headlines and praise, it was Wilkes' defensive resilience against Love that saved the entire team. He held his own, using his length and quickness to counter Love's strength and aggression. Love averaged 21 points on 43.7% shooting in that entire playoff run. Wilkes averaged 15 points on 44.6% shooting. The efficiency was absolutely there. The defense was stellar, but the physical scars were permanent and lasting. Give this video some hype if you're feeling Silk's story so far. By surviving that series, Wilkes shed the too thin label forever. He became an all-defensive second-team selection the very next year, and again the year after that. But he will never forgive Love for the physical toll, for the bruises, for forcing him to learn that survival in the NBA is a skill as important as shooting ability. Love didn't just beat him. Love made him into a survivor. And that's what makes it unforgivable, because it cost him something he could never get back, no matter how many rings he won later. The second legend is Rick Barry. If Bob Love was the external enemy forcing physical pain, Rick Barry was the internal saboteur working from within. And this one stings differently because it's personal betrayal. Barry was a future Hall of Famer, one of the most talented scorers in basketball history. He was also notoriously difficult and toxic to teammates. A perfectionist who lacked the emotional intelligence to lead without destroying people. For a rookie like Wilkes, who thrived on harmony and collective purpose, who was raised in John Wooden's pyramid of success at UCLA, Barry was a shock to the entire system. Barry led by intimidation and constant critique, not by empowerment or building people up. The 1975 Warriors championship is remembered as the greatest upset in NBA Finals history. They swept the heavily favored Washington Bullets in dominant fashion. The narrative focuses entirely on Barry's brilliance. He was the finals MVP. He carried the team on his shoulders. But the structural reality of that team relied completely on Wilkes' contributions. Wilkes averaged 14.2 points and 8.2 rebounds, serving as the perfect Robin to Barry's Batman. But there's no joy in being a Robin to someone so volatile and self-centered. Barry demanded the ball in the spotlight constantly and obsessively. Wilkes, naturally unselfish and team-oriented, acquiesced to every demand. The constant pressure of playing alongside a genius who resented sharing any space wore him down mentally and emotionally. In Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals against Chicago, when Love was physically tormenting him, it was actually Wilkes who carried the team offensively when Barry struggled early in the contest. Wilkes shot 10 for 19 and scored 23 points in that critical game. That's the game winner. That's the moment that launched the dynasty. But in the post-game narratives and subsequent finals coverage, Barry absorbed all the oxygen, all the glory, all the mythology, all the attention and praise. The friction between them reached its breaking point in 1977. Despite on-court success and a championship ring, Wilkes made a historic and personal decision. He left the Warriors. This was the dawn of the free agency era, and Wilkes became one of the first major stars to voluntarily change teams. He signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. The research is explicit. Barry's difficult personality was a primary factor in Wilkes' decision to leave. Think about that for a second. A championship environment that became unbearable by one man's toxicity. A title-winning core abandoned because the emotional tax was too high to continue paying. Later in life, Barry softened his approach. He publicly advocated for Wilkes' Hall of Fame induction, calling him the ideal teammate and role model. But forgiveness in the personal sense doesn't erase the professional scar. Barry robbed Wilkes of the joy of that first championship run. He made young Silk realize that talent alone does not make a leader. That's a lesson Wilkes carried forward into his relationships with Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, leaders who, unlike Barry, empowered him rather than diminished him constantly. By 1980, Jamaal Wilkes was an established star for the Los Angeles Lakers. His new rival was Julius Erving of the Philadelphia 76ers. This rivalry was profoundly different from the others. It was defined by mutual respect and admiration. Both players were labeled as the classiest in the entire league, but Erving represents something far darker than physical or psychological challenges, obscuration and erasure. Dr. J wasn't just a player, he was a cultural phenomenon. He was the dunk, the afro, the shoe deal, the essence of cool. Wilkes, with his unusual shot and quiet demeanor, was the absolute antithesis of that brand. When they matched up, the media narrative was always about the doctor. Even when Wilkes outplayed him decisively, the camera lens remained fixed on Erving. The 1980 NBA Finals is the crucible of this rivalry. This series is immortalized for Game 6, where rookie Magic Johnson started at center for the injured Kareem and scored 42 points in a legendary performance. This game became the genesis myth of the Magic Johnson legend, but something absolutely unforgivable happened in that exact same game. Jamaal Wilkes scored 37 points and grabbed 10 rebounds in the championship-clinching victory. He dominated the entire 76ers defense. He torched Erving repeatedly with his corner jumper and baseline cuts. He delivered a complete masterpiece. Yet because he was playing against Dr. J, the cultural icon, and alongside Magic, the new icon, his performance was relegated to a historical footnote. Magic got 42 and 15. The media called it the greatest rookie performance ever recorded. Wilkes got 37 and 10 and was virtually forgotten by history. On that same night, Erving scored 27 points and controlled the narrative. Wilkes outplayed him decisively. Bill Russell, watching these matchups carefully, declared the Erving versus Wilkes battle a complete wash. For a defensive-minded role-player perception to exist around Wilkes while Erving was considered a god, Russell's assessment was a vindication. It meant Wilkes had neutralized the best player on the planet. But being awash with a legend is a thankless task. It requires a level of consistent, grinding excellence that goes completely uncelebrated. Wilkes had to play perfect positional defense to contain Erving's athleticism. He had to score efficiently to match Erving's flair. The mental exhaustion of maintaining parity with a cultural deity is the debt Erving owes him. In 1982, the Lakers faced the Sixers again. Wilkes continued to produce at a high level. The dynamic remained. Erving was the protagonist of the tragedy. Wilkes was merely the instrument of his defeat. The basketball world, entranced by Erving's magnetism, refused to grant Wilkes the title of superstar, even as he dismantled the reigning superstar twice on the biggest stage. By 1984, the small forward position was evolving rapidly. Larry Bird brought something entirely new to the game. He brought a combination of size, rebounding power, and shooting range that Wilkes, slender and aging, struggled to match. Bird was 6'9" and 220 pounds. Wilkes was 6'6" and under 200 pounds. Bird was not just a scorer. He was a physical bully who used his hips, elbows, and size to wear defenders into absolute submission. Bird represents unforgivable domination in its truest form, no mercy. Wilkes has explicitly referred to guarding Bird as a nightmare scenario. He said it himself. He was a perimeter player, a playmaker, and a driver. Endless trouble. But every night was tough, man. You had to guard Larry on a Monday night. Are you kidding me? Bird targeted Wilkes intentionally. He knew Wilkes was too thin to push him off the block, and by 1984, too slow to chase him off screens. Bird's trash talk, legendary in its cruelty, likely focused on these insecurities. He made Wilkes feel every single year of his age. In the 1984 finals, Bird dominated every game. The Celtics won in 7 games in a series nobody expected to be so close. The series is known as the Tragic Johnson series because Magic made crucial mistakes. But for Wilkes, it was a personal defeat of the highest order. He struggled to impact the series as he had in 1980 or 1982. Bird's relentless excellence exposed Wilkes' declining athleticism. Before Bird, Wilkes was silk, ageless and smooth and efficient. After battling Bird in 1984, Wilkes looked mortal. Bird stripped away the aura of invincibility that Wilkes had carefully constructed over a decade of winning championships and playing at the highest level. The Lakers management looked at that series and immediately saw what Bird had revealed. They realized they could not beat Boston with Wilkes as the primary option on Bird anymore. This realization led directly to the elevation of Michael Cooper and James Worthy in their defensive schemes. Bird forced the end. He forced obsolescence. And Wilkes will never forgive him for that exposure, for proving he was breakable, for accelerating the clock on his career. The final figure on this list is James Worthy, and this one is the cruelest of all because it's the most intimate and personal betrayal. The relationship between Jamaal Wilkes and James Worthy is a Shakespearean tragedy disguised as a sports rivalry. Worthy represents unforgivable obsolescence in its most painful form. The Lakers acquired the #1 overall pick in the 1982 draft. They used it to select James Worthy, a 6'9" athletic marvel from North Carolina, who was essentially a turbocharged version of the modern small forward. Most veterans would resent a rookie coming for their job and starting role. Wilkes, true to his character, embraced Worthy completely. He mentored him. They became close friends off the court. Worthy spoke of Wilkes with immense love, saying he showed him so much care and guidance. This friendship makes what happened next absolutely unforgivable. By teaching Worthy how to be a professional, Wilkes accelerated his own demise. He sharpened the blade that would cut him from the roster. For 2 seasons, they coexisted peacefully. Wilkes started. Worthy came off the bench or played alongside him. But the 1984 loss to Bird made it clear the Lakers needed more dynamism. They needed youth. The end came abruptly on February 1st, 1985. Against the New York Knicks, Wilkes suffered a torn ligament in his left knee after a collision with another player. He missed the final 40 games of the season. In his absence, James Worthy blossomed beyond anyone's expectations. He moved into the starting lineup and became Big Game James. The Lakers' offense became faster and more explosive. They returned to the finals in 1985, faced the Celtics, and finally beat them. Wilkes watched from the sidelines. He received a ring. He was part of the team. But he knew he had contributed nothing to the final triumph over Bird. The ring felt hollow because the victory belonged to someone else. The Lakers waived Wilkes shortly after. He finished his career with a brief, forgettable stint on the Clippers. The friendship with Worthy remained. They stayed close throughout their lives. But the professional wound never truly heals. Worthy is the living reminder that time waits for no one, that even the smoothest game gets replaced by something younger, faster, and stronger. Worthy proved that the Lakers didn't need Wilkes anymore. There is no greater pain for a competitor than irrelevance itself. At 72, looking back on all of this, Wilkes sits with these 5 unforgivable debts. Bob Love took away his innocence with welts and bruises. Rick Barry poisoned his first championship with toxicity and resentment. Julius Erving eclipsed his greatest performances with cultural magnetism he couldn't control or match. Larry Bird exposed his mortality and accelerated his decline. James Worthy, his friend, rendered him redundant and replaceable. These 5 legends are the architects of Jamaal Wilkes' exile from the pantheon of the greatest ever. They are the reason he is remembered as a winner rather than as a superstar. They took pieces of his narrative and claimed them for themselves, but in doing so, they also forged him. Without the fire of Love, the pressure of Barry, the standard of Irving, the test of Bird, and the succession of Worthy, there is no Silk. There is no Hall of Famer. There is no legacy of quiet excellence and dignity that defines his entire career and life. At 72, looking back on all of this, Wilkes sits with these 5 unforgivable debts. Bob Love took away his innocence with welts and bruises. Rick Barry poisoned his first championship with toxicity and resentment. Julius Erving eclipsed his greatest performances with cultural magnetism he couldn't control or match. Larry Bird exposed his mortality and accelerated his decline. James Worthy, his friend, rendered him redundant and replaceable. These 5 legends are the architects of Jamaal Wilkes' exile from the pantheon of the greatest ever. They are the reason he is remembered as a winner rather than as a superstar. They took pieces of his narrative and claimed them for themselves. But in doing so, they also forged him. Without the fire of Love, the pressure of Barry, the standard of Irving, the test of Bird, and the succession of Worthy, always.